It is crucial for us to address these issues head-on, with clarity and with a commitment to finding workable solutions.
When Barron Trump, the youngest heir to America's most controversial dynasty, looked across the stage and branded Representative Jasmine Crockett UNFIT, the word did not land softly. It cracked like glass in a silent cathedral. For a fraction of a second, the air itself seemed to pause. Cameras blinked red, capturing every angle. The crowd leaned forward, some with smirks, others with narrowed eyes. And then, nothing but the hum of the microphone stretching the moment into eternity. Crockett stood motionless, her posture rigid against the insult. The accusation was not just a word, it was a dagger wrapped in legacy, sharpened by privilege, thrown with the force of a family name built on spectacle. To call her unfit wasn't a critique, it was a dismissal and erasure, an attempt to shrink her into silence. The kind of word designed to stick, to echo, to poison reputations long after the applause died down. But the silence that followed was not submission, it was pressure. It was the collective question rising in the minds of everyone watching. Would she fight back, or would she let the insult stand unchallenged? Barron leaned back, the corners of his mouth betraying the confidence of a boy raised on applause, certain the moment belonged to him. The stage lights flared against his suit, casting his shadow across her. Yet Crockett did not flinch. Behind her eyes, something stirred. A calculation. A storm gathering. The audience could not see it yet, but she carried a weapon of her own. One not forged in family wealth or inherited power, but in the raw grind of battles fought when no one was watching. She had a recording hidden until now, a truth that could not be undone once revealed. And here lies the question that burned through the auditorium. What could a single recording possibly hold that would flip the insult back on the one who hurled it? What words, what confession, what private crack in the armor of a dynasty could turn silence into shockwaves? Barron's insult was supposed to end the moment. Instead, it lit the fuse, and Crockett, unblinking, stood ready to let the explosion come. The insult did not arrive in a vacuum. It came wrapped in the weight of a name that had already bent the country into sharp divides. Barron Trump was not supposed to be here, not yet. For years, he had been the quiet figure in the background, the child shielded from the harshest lights of his family's empire. But dynasties have gravity, and the Trump name does not allow silence for long. The whispers had started months earlier. He's stepping in, he's carrying the torch, he's the new heir. For some, it was destiny. For others, a nightmare replaying itself with a fresher face. His entrance into politics was not born of experience or long service. It was staged like a coronation, as if the last name itself was enough to rewrite qualifications. Cameras followed him as though his every step signaled inevitability. Commentators speculating on whether America was watching the opening act of a dynasty solidifying its second generation. In that light, calling someone else unfit was not just an insult. It was a projection. It was power flexed without being earned. Across from him stood Jasmine Crockett, sharp, relentless, unapologetic. A congresswoman forged in battles where the spotlight rarely shone. Her reputation was that of a fighter who refused to yield. She was underestimated by design, written off by opponents who confused passion with fragility, who mistook her fire for recklessness. But those who watched closely knew her relentlessness was not noise. It was armor. When Barron's word cut the air, the polarity of their worlds sharpened into focus. He represented privilege carried like inheritance. Battles fought for him long before he arrived, stages set before he even spoke. She represented the earned grit of someone who had clawed her way forward, tested by systems meant to grind her down. The clash between them was not merely personal, it was ideological. The word unfit became the spark inside a theater already burning. Politics had been boiling in spectacle for years, but this confrontation condensed it into a single human exchange. The young heir dismissed the seasoned fighter, believing his surname gave him the authority to decide her worth. And the fighter, standing silent, holding back the one card that could flip the balance. The crowd sensed the magnitude. This was not just a debate stage. It was an arena where identity and power collided in plain view. Every camera angle widened to capture the contrast, his composure rehearsed, her silence defiant. It was more than a disagreement. It was a test of dignity. What happens when privilege collides with defiance? When Leto's Gacy tries to overwrite resilience? In that moment, the answer had not yet been revealed. But the tension pulsed like static, daring Crockett to unleash what she carried. To understand the sting of the word, unfit, you need to know who Barron was becoming. Barron Trump's arrival on the political stage carried the aura of inevitability. He had been raised in the rarefied air of skyscraper suites and private estates, his life curated by the myth of a family name larger than most cities. For years, he had been framed as untouchable, the quiet observer in the gilded background. When he finally stepped forward, it was not as a novice but as a symbol, the embodiment of a dynasty extending its reach. His strengths appeared obvious: youth, height, a face still fresh to the cameras. Commentators spoke of a next-generation Trump, someone who could soften the hard edges of the past while carrying the same brand of spectacle. But the surface advantages carried an irony too sharp to ignore. His youth was also inexperienced. His height, meant to command presence, often cast him awkwardly out of place. His fresh face, free of scandal for now, lacked the grit that only struggle provides. Behind the scenes, whispers trailed him. He leaned on scripts crafted by advisors, sound bites engineered to echo his father's bravado but polished just enough for modern ears. Authenticity was borrowed, never earned, and every move he made was shadowed by comparison, not only to his father's towering influence but to the dynasties America had both revered and destroyed. This was his rise, an ascent built on scaffolding, not foundation, a climb buoyed by inherited spectacle, not forged experience. And therein lay the hypocrisy, a man branding others unfit, while standing on a platform built entirely for him. But here's what they never expected: the moment when privilege collided with resistance, when a single recording would turn the hair's aura of inevitability into a spectacle of doubt. Jasmine Crockett's story was never meant to be easy. She entered politics not through the gilded doorways of privilege, but by scraping her way through battles no one else wanted to fight. Courtrooms where the odds were stacked, communities where trust in the system had long been broken. These were the places she cut her teeth. Every step forward demanded more than skill, it demanded sacrifice. She carried the bruises of being underestimated. Colleagues who dismissed her passion as volatility. Opponents who labeled her angry when she was simply unyielding. Each slight, each whisper, became another stone pressed onto her shoulders. Yet the weight never crushed her, it hardened her resolve. In a world where voices like hers were expected to falter, she refused to break. But the cost was real: late nights, endless scrutiny, the personal toll of constantly proving her worth. Trust, once given, was often betrayed. Alliances collapsing the moment they threatened the powerful. Pain was her constant companion, but so too was resilience. Crockett knew that every insult thrown at her, every attempt to silence her, became fuel. It was this very crucible that made her dangerous to opponents like Barron Trump. Where his strength came from was inherited, hers came forged. She was uniquely prepared for moments where the stakes turned brutal, where dignity itself was on trial. So when Barron cast the word "unfit" across the stage, it did not land on fragile ground. It landed on a foundation built from every battle she had already survived. The insult might have silenced another. For her, it became a signal, until one moment flipped the script. Barron Trump didn't stop at the word "unfit." He leaned into it, his voice carrying a sharpened edge, the smirk on his face daring Crockett to react. The crowd split in two instantly, half roaring with approval, the other half tightening into murmurs of disapproval. Applause crashed against boos, a storm of noise that filled the auditorium like a stadium fight. Barron soaked it in, lifting his chin as though every cheer confirmed his dominance, every jeer only proof that he had struck a nerve. He doubled down, the mockery slipping into a practiced rhythm. "This isn't about me," he declared, his tone dripping with self-satisfaction. "This is about protecting the values that make this country strong. And frankly, those values demand that leaders meet a certain standard. That's why I have to say it: you are unfit." The word struck again, a hammer against stone. His supporters clapped in unison, hungry for repetition, for spectacle. Gaslighting wrapped around his performance. He wasn't insulting, he insisted, he was safeguarding. Not silencing, but clarifying. The more he spoke, the more he painted himself as the noble heir, the guardian of order. Standing tall against chaos, he crafted the illusion that dismissing Crockett was not cruel but a civic duty. And yet, across the stage, Crockett stood steady. Her stillness was unnerving, the kind that silences rooms without a single word. Where Barron played to the crowd, she seemed to be measuring the weight of the moment itself, as if her silence was the true verdict. Slowly, she raised her hand, not to interrupt but to steady the rising fever in the room. The crowd quieted, sensing something unscripted was about to arrive. When she spoke, her voice was not shaken but deliberate, carved from steel. "Unfit," she repeated, almost tasting the word before she released it. The audience leaned in. "You want to talk about fitness? You want to talk about standards? Fine. But if we're going to use that word, then maybe the people deserve to hear what your side says when they think no one is listening." Gasps rippled through the auditorium. Heads turned, whispers shot through the aisles like sparks across dry grass. Barron's smirk faltered for the briefest of moments, a crack quickly covered with a scoff. He laughed into the microphone, trying to reclaim dominance. "There you go again," he sneered, deflecting, playing victim. "Always blaming others instead of proving your worth." Typical. He gestured grandly, inviting the crowd's laughter to rise with his own. But Crockett didn't flinch. She let the wave of mockery wash over her without reaction, her silence growing heavier with each passing second. The laughter dimmed. She stepped closer to her microphone, lowering her voice, forcing the audience to listen. "If I'm unfit, as you say," she continued, "then let's put your claim to the test. Not with slogans, not with sound bites, with your own truth." Barron blinked, uncertain now. The room tightened. Phones lifted higher, recording every frame. Crockett reached beneath her papers, fingers brushing against the slim device she had carried all along. The tension was unbearable, the kind of silence that vibrates with unspoken possibility. Her words struck like a match to gasoline. "Because I have here," she said, pausing long enough for the cameras to zoom in, a recording of voices from your own circle. And once this plays, the people in this room, and everyone watching across the country, can decide for themselves who is fit to lead, and who is not. The room exploded in reaction. Gasps, shouts, chairs scraping as people stood to catch a glimpse. Barron's face hardened, his smirk evaporating into a glare. He shifted in his seat, gripping the microphone, opening his mouth as if to stop her, but too late. Crockett's hand hovered over the device. The air was thick, suspended, every second stretching into forever. And then, with deliberate calm, Jasmine Crockett pressed play. The room braced itself as Jasmine Crockett's finger tapped the device. A sharp click, then the static hiss of a recording breaking into the silence. Every ear strained forward, every camera zoomed tighter. The air, once thick with Barron's confidence, began to bend toward her. At first, the voices were muffled, indistinct, like secrets weren't ready to be shared. But then clarity cut through. A familiar voice, one unmistakably aligned with Barron's own circle, laughed in private tones. "We can't keep defending him forever. He's not ready. He's a liability." The effect was instantaneous. Gasps shot across the auditorium like ricocheting bullets. People clutched their chests, whispered to neighbors, and fumbled with phones to capture the moment. The word liability echoed, cruelly ironic, a reversal of the word Barron had thrown just minutes earlier, unfit. Barron's face stiffened, his jaw clenched, lips pressed thin, but the cameras caught the twitch in his eye, the nervous shift of his hand gripping the microphone stand. His smirk had collapsed into something rawer, a boy caught in a storm without an umbrella, scrambling to hold himself together. The recording continued. Another voice, older, calculated, whispered, "What can prop him up for now? The name carries weight, but behind closed doors we all know he's not built for this." The crowd erupted again, disbelief curdling into awe. Murmurs became open chatter. Phones shot upward, capturing both Crockett's composure and Barron's unraveling. Hashtags formed in real time, the collective consciousness of the moment already streaming to millions online. "Can unfit, fight the recording, Crockett vs. Trump." Crockett stood calm, her face steady as marble. She didn't gloat, didn't rush. She let the words hang, let the weight of betrayal land not from her lips but from his allies' mouths. She wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was turning the stage into a mirror, reflecting the contradictions of a dynasty that thrived on appearances yet faltered in substance. The third voice cut deeper still. "He has the name, sure, but he can't think on his feet. If someone pushes, he freezes. That's the truth. We'll spin it for the cameras, but behind the curtain, everyone knows." Barron's hand twitched. He tried to interrupt, leaning toward the microphone, but the sound system betrayed him. Feedback screeched, forcing him to pull back. The irony was sharp. The boy who once owned the stage was now silenced by its very tools. He sat there glaring, jaw tight, knuckles whitening around the mic. The crowd sensed his weakness. The split from earlier, cheers versus boos, was gone. Now there was only the churn of murmurs, disbelief bleeding into mockery, mockery into silence. Every shift in body language told the story, a dynasty cracking not from an external blow, but from its own hollow foundation. Crockett, steady, leaned closer to her microphone, her voice clear, deliberate. "So let's be very clear," she said, pausing as the recording looped its damning refrain. "Unfit. That was the word you used. But the word your own people use for you is liability. The question isn't about my fitness. It's about yours." Her words weren't shouted. They were measured, precise, cutting deeper because of their calmness. The audience leaned in, silence folding the room into a single heartbeat. She had not only survived his insult, she had inverted it, weaponized it, made it his. Barron shifted again, this time unable to mask the fury spilling into his expression. His composure was cracking, his voice strained as he finally forced words into the microphone. Fake, he spat, the word desperate, defensive. This is a fake, a setup, a smear job! His voice rose, but the tremor beneath it betrayed him. The crowd wasn't buying it. The laughter that once rallied at his command now sounded hollow, scattered, unconvincing. Phones recorded every second, broadcasting his unraveling in real time. Memes were already forming, captions ready to brand him with the very words his allies had spoken. His anger, his frantic denials, only fueled the spectacle. Every attempt to reclaim power became another nail in the coffin of credibility. Crockett didn't need to argue. She let the recording play again, the repetition a haunting chorus. We can't keep defending him forever. He's not ready, he's a liability. Each cycle grew heavier, like a hammer striking steel, ringing louder with every repetition. The crowd had shifted fully now, from divided loyalty to collective revelation. The murmurs turned to silence, and the silence carried judgment. She looked at Barron, not with anger but with something sharper, clarity. In her eyes was the recognition of every time she had been dismissed, underestimated, mocked. All now returned in a single, undeniable moment. This wasn't personal revenge, it was justice drawn into the light. Barron's face flushed red, his lips moving as if to form words he couldn't string together. His body betrayed him, shoulders slumping, eyes darting, the mask of inevitability stripped away. He was no longer hair untouchable. He was exposed, fragile, his dynasty's contradictions laid bare by a woman he had branded unfit. The crowd sat suspended in silence, every person aware they had witnessed a turning point. History did not always announce itself with speeches or wars. Sometimes it arrived in a recording played at the right moment, in the right room, by the right voice. And as the final seconds of the recording faded into the hum of the speakers, Crockett straightened, her words slicing the silence. This isn't about a single insult anymore. It's about the cracks in a dynasty. The stage no longer belonged to Barron. It belonged to the truth, and to the woman who dared to play it. The silence after the recording was suffocating, and Barron lunged for it like a drowning man gasping for air. He straightened his shoulders, forced steel into his voice, and tried to turn humiliation into doctrine. Let's not forget, he said, his words sharp but uneven, what we're fighting for. Family values, strength, tradition. You can play all the tapes you want, but the truth is, our side stands for America, for God, for the people. And shit, he jabbed a finger toward Crockett. She stands for chaos, division, weakness. It was the Trump playbook distilled into sound bites meant to remind the crowd of loyalty, of the myth of dynasty. But the words clattered to the floor hollow. The tape was still ringing in their ears. His family's own voices had already branded him weak. His thunder sounded like tin. Crockett didn't flinch. She waited until the crowd's murmurs dipped, then leaned forward, her voice controlled, deliberate. You want to talk about family values? She asked, holding up a stack of papers, neat, stapled, impossible to ignore. Because your allies said one thing in private, but here's what your policies say in public. The audience stiffened. Every eye tracked the papers, every camera zoomed in. Crockett wasn't improvising. She had receipts, strength. She pressed on. When your team slashed funding for veteran health care in committee while calling it efficiency. That's not a strength. That's betrayal. Barron's face twisted, ready to interject, but she cut him off with precision. Tradition. When your campaign's biggest donor was caught funneling money through shell corporations last fall. That's not tradition. That's corruption dressed in a flag. Gasps cut through the hall. The crowd's energy had transformed, from passive spectators to a roaring current, riding the rhythm of her dismantling. Phones lit the air like fireflies, hashtags climbing in real time. Thy receipts, Crockett claps back, Fey dynasty cracked. Barron tried to summon authority, his voice rising. You're twisting the truth! Those are mischaracterizations, cherry-picked attacks. But Crockett's rebuttal was scalpel, sharp. No, Barron. Those are your signatures, your votes, your record. The truth doesn't need to be twisted. It just needs to be read aloud. The room shuddered with applause, not polite but primal. Commentators in the back row leaned over each other, whispering frantic takes into cameras, already spinning live coverage to millions. Crockett flips the script. Trump hair on the defense. The audience became part of the spectacle itself. Some cheered, some shouted, some simply filmed with trembling hands, aware they were capturing history's hinge. The moral terrain shifted beneath Barron's feet. He had branded her unfit. She had branded him exposed. Desperation colored his voice now. You don't understand what leadership means. You've never carried the weight of history, the burden of expectation. Crockett interrupted, her voice calm but cutting. Burden. You inherited a name, I inherited a struggle, and the difference, Barron, is that I had to earn every inch of this stage. The crowd thundered. Hashtags detonated into trending dominance. Paying earned not given surged across feeds. In living rooms across America, families argued, laughed, wept. The spectacle had leapt beyond the auditorium and into the bloodstream of the nation. For the first time, it wasn't Barron defining Crockett. It was Crockett defining Barron. Each attempt at spin became another rope binding him tighter, every ideological broadside reduced to ash by the precision of her facts. The dynasty's armor, long polished by loyalty and fear, had been stripped away in front of millions, and as the applause swelled into something almost unbearable, Crockett lowered her voice to a whisper that cut sharper than any shout. This isn't just politics. This is accountability. And for once, Barron Trump, you don't get to define the terms. The crowd exploded, the sound shaking the rafters, a mixture of triumph and disbelief. Barron, red-faced, stood isolated in the glare of the lights, his dynasty's myth cracking in real time. But even victory can be dangerous. The lights glared hotter than ever, but Barron couldn't hold his posture anymore. His face, taut with fury, gave way to something rawer. Panic. A ripple of boos and scattered applause washed over him as he shoved the microphone aside. No final defense, no controlled exit. He stormed off the stage, shoulders rigid, his entourage trailing behind like shadows scrambling to catch a falling crown. The crowd erupted, not in jeers but in stunned exhilaration. Every phone in the room shot upward, the click of cameras echoing like rain. What had begun as an insult had transformed into a reckoning, and Crockett stood alone at center stage, the fire of vindication glowing in her eyes. She didn't need to gloat. She didn't need to say another word. The silence she held, the calm with which she gathered her papers, was its own declaration. The insult of UNFIT now clung to Barron himself, its syllables hanging in the air like a curse turned inside out. The audience roared its approval. Strangers clasped hands, voices overlapped in chants, and laughter spilled between gasps. Crockett's composure was a gravitational force, and for the first time that night, the room didn't belong to dynasty or inheritance. It belonged to grit. To her. Outside the hall, the fallout accelerated in real time. Screens across the nation flickered with the clip of her pressing play, the split second when the recording sliced open the Trump mystique. News anchors broke into coverage, commentators scrambling for metaphors strong enough to match the moment. Hashtags ignited like fireworks, UNFIT backfired, dynasty cracked, pay Crockett strong. Edith's hit TikTok within minutes. Barron's finger jabbing contrasted with Crockett's calm stare, set to bass heavy drops. Memes painted him as a puppet unraveling, while Crockett's image stood framed in fire, captions declaring her, the woman who stood alone and didn't blink. In living rooms, bars, dormitories, and office cubicles, the reaction was the same catharsis, a release of long, simmering tension. Viewers leaned forward in their seats, whispering to themselves that they had witnessed something bigger than politics, a reversal, a crack in a name that had seemed untouchable. And at the heart of it, Jasmine Crockett remained steady. She had not only defended her dignity, she had claimed the ground on which she stood. In that single night, she shifted from being underestimated to undeniable. The word UNFIT still echoed, but now it ricocheted in reverse, carrying Barron's shadow instead of hers. A dynasty had tried to define her, and instead, it revealed its own fractures. As the crowd surged around her, as history etched itself onto feeds and front pages, one truth became impossible to ignore: she hadn't just survived the insult. She had transformed it into a weapon, wielded it, and left her mark on the American stage. But if one recording could shake a dynasty, what else was waiting to be uncovered? Barron Trump called Jasmine Crockett UNFIT. But in front of the cameras, the microphones, and a divided crowd, she proved unstoppable. What was meant as humiliation transformed into revelation. The arrogance of a dynasty collided with the resilience of truth, and truth did not blink. This wasn't just about a single exchange. It was about the illusion of power unraveling the moment it met someone unwilling to be silenced. Crockett didn't win with volume or status or inherited influence. She won with proof, with poise, and with the courage to turn an insult into a mirror. And in that reflection, the dynasty flinched. If you had been in that room, hearing the word UNFIT echo across the stage, seeing the recording light up every phone screen, whose side would you have been on? The heir with every advantage, or the fighter who carried none but refused to bend? Moments like this don't just fade. They ignite movements, and if you've watched this far, you're part of it. So comment, and subscribe, not just for more stories, but because this movement is just beginning, and you won't want to miss what comes next.